I am a lawyer. I practice. Is this working on? Is it working?
Yeah,
Okay,
higher.
good.
Ninja's going to say
So
higher.
I'm a lawyer. Practiced law in Washington D.C. and Chicago for many, many years. Ended up working in politics, and for many years, and now I'm with a firm in D.C. and help countries, companies, organizations with all kinds of issues. So,
Thank you, Colin.
Is it on?
Yeah, I think it's on. Yeah, I'm also a lawyer, which makes us wonder what you two are doing here. In any event, I practiced in New York and then started representing startups. So I decided to move to Silicon Valley, where I did that for the better part of a decade with one of the Valley's leading firms, and then figured I should probably get some entrepreneurial expertise and experience. So I left the practice of law to do emerging markets, private equity investing, set up fund structures, and deal with transactions of a more global nature. Silicon Valley was great training, great opportunity set, but the world was bigger than that. So I ended up moving out of Silicon Valley to San Diego County, because you have to live somewhere. So I was a refugee from Silicon Valley to San Diego, and I aspire to be a refugee from California to anywhere where I have to pay less tax. But also spent some time in Chicago, lovely town, one of my favorites. Best 3 years of my life were when I was at the University of Chicago, and fortunate to call the people that I spent time with then my best friends, and I work with them on a daily basis to solve legal problems for our common clients and share ideas. So it's been a great career so far, and in the audience with me today is a colleague on a new project that I'm working on, where I'm the general counsel and chief operating officer of Sea Cheetah, which is a wing and ground effect marine transport hydrogen-powered technology. Super exciting. You're going to hear a little bit more about that later.
Thank you, Dr. Williams.
I'm an emergency trauma physician by training and was director of the emergency department at Sunnybrook Health Science Center at a regional trauma unit in Toronto in 1992 when I saw an ad in the newspaper, "Want to be an astronaut?" Sure, why not? How can you say no to that, right? So I applied, joined the space program, the Canadian space program in 92, and trained in Canada for a couple of years, went down to Johnson Space Center 95, flew my first space flight in 98, was part of senior management at NASA through a joint interagency agreement the Canadian government loaned me to the U.S. government. And I was the director of life sciences at Johnson Space Center for 4 years and the deputy associate administrator of the Office of Spaceflight in Washington as well. And that was a lot of fun commuting back and forth. But my goal was to get back to space. So I flew again in 2007, helped build the space station, retired, and then went on to become a hospital CEO. And now I'm a CEO of a biomedical tech startup company.
I am the least impressive person on stage. How many here do business only in the United States? Handful. It's easy, isn't it, doing business? Like, there's no problems, there's no issues, there's no fear. How many here do business internationally, around the world? Now tell me, you know the law, right? Which one? And not knowing the law, what I think you'll probably say is, ignorance of the law is no excuse for breaking whatever law it is. You ran the White House, Mark Lindsay. You were responsible for a team of people that were probably all around the world, and you had to know rules and regulations, and you had to become an expert on it. So give us some advice. We are looking to go to someone's backyard. We don't know anything about their backyard, but we think we'll be successful doing business there. How do we start?
I think the first rule that I learned from my experience in government was the importance of developing direct personal relationships with individuals. You heard it from a number of the people who have already spoken here today. I think this is just as true for the government or the White House doing business in places around the world. I think it's very, very true. Recognizing and acknowledging the humanity of other people through that type of engagement is the first step in breaking barriers and being able to make deals, develop relationships, and form better alliances.
Now, coming over to you then, Colin, because you and I met in Monaco. We were in a room of people. Some of them today are on the sanction list. For no fault of their own, a dictator made some decisions. So it's challenging that we're impacted by business, by others' choices. How do we insulate ourselves?
I'm gonna criticize the use of the word insulate. It's not necessarily that you want to insulate yourself from the problem of business, because the problem generates the possibility of generating return, right? So what you want is you want to accept those problems and structure around them to the extent possible so that you can figure out how you're going to build this business with these people, again, with these relationships in a country where you're not, it's not your home country. It's a different set of rules. And then you have to work through local partners, very much so, in order to achieve the right results. A couple of decades ago, I was on a similar stage talking about emerging markets, private equity investing, and folks were talking about how they were going to send money to China and India and Russia and Brazil, the BRICS. And I said, there's no world where you can effectively send a team from Silicon Valley to go do India private equity venture capital investing with any hope that that money is going to come home, unless you have boots on the ground with very good relationships, both in government relations but also business relations, to make sure that your rights are going to be protected and respected. And that is essentially relationship driven. So how do you develop those relationships so that you can mitigate the risks that you know that you have to take in order to generate a return?
You're shaking your head, Mr. Lindsay. Add to it.
I am. I think that it's a little bit ironic that most people think lawyers destroy relationships as opposed to build them. But I think that we know better than many why the importance of having relationships with other people is better than, I was a litigator, than having me handle the matter, because under those circumstances you get the most usually suboptimal results. So it's better to work those things out to come to some kind of agreement. And the same thing is true with conflicts. Wars waste lives, resources, and all the rest. You want to avoid that, and that's why relationships and making direct connections are so critical.
Now, sitting on boards, though, I mean, you are someone that gives your time to boards around the world in someone else's backyard. Why?
I think the number one, I don't think that you can affect change unless you're involved in places and in activities where you can implement that change. And in many of the examples that I've seen, it's through the conduct of the people who are engaged in it. Meeting someone who is a representative of another government who you're impressed by and who you like leaves a very profound impression on other people. So all of us, we heard from an ambassador here today, but we're all ambassadors as we go out into the world to carry that message forward, and we can either do harm or good. So the more you engage and the more you do that ambassadorial work, the more you help your country, the more you help your business, and the more you help understanding.
You're here on stage not as an astronaut right now, as a CEO. You led a hospital system, Dr. Williams, in Canada. You cared about the patient. It was all about taking care of the patient, yet you had a bottom line. You had people telling you, we've got to make money. Talk about that time. Tell me the process.
I think there's tremendous global opportunity in healthcare, particularly when we get together and talk about the differences and similarities between systems all over the world. The Canadian system is quite different than the American system, different than the British system, and different from other systems in Europe. There's no single greatest system, but we can learn from each other how to operate healthcare in the most cost-effective manner. And we were talking earlier about boards. All of us as CEOs, we do have bosses. They're called the boards. And when I went to my board chair and I said, we're comparing our hospital's outcome data against OECD data, his first question was, why are we doing that? And I said, well, we're doing that because we want to be best in class. And I think that's truly the greatest opportunity that we all have, is to be able to learn from each other as we aspire to work together. Interestingly enough, one of the things that the space program does is it encourages that international collaboration. And in the area of space medicine right now, the regulatory framework to deliver healthcare in space is currently being led by NASA and the U.S. space program, because we now have this new era of private space exploration. So if I take care of a patient in space, Where did I get that license to practice medicine in space? I got that by virtue of the NASA training program that we, the international partner agencies, agree to. And we say that if you're a graduate of that program as an astronaut, you can then treat humans in space. So this whole regulatory framework developed by NASA through the international partners for the space station will now cascade into a new era of space law, space medicine, and space technology development.
So you see there will be a time where the industries they're in will be in outer space.
You know, there's absolutely no question about that. And I'll speak to this a bit more tonight, but when you're in space and you orbit the Earth every 90 minutes, there's no borders between countries we can see from space. And there's this balance between a global perspective and national interests. And global perspective and global thinking does not preclude nationalism and national interests. And I think what's really interesting in space is you learn the lesson of the opportunity of collaboration. Through the international partners, the major space agencies of the world, led by NASA, Russia, Canada, the European Space Agency, Japan, we've had more than 30 countries participating in research in space and economic development. Don't tell anyone, but spaceflight, it's a little bit about space. It's mainly about economic development and opportunity and innovation. And when you're talking about a global space economy today valued at roughly $350 billion, growing to $1.1 trillion in the next 20 years, I don't know about you, I want to play in that arena.
I just don't want to have to sit for another bar exam to practice space law.
Me neither.
Talk about the process of trusting people. Because in this room, I am very proud to say, and it was my responsibility to vet everyone here as they vetted me over time. But when we're doing business globally, and I'm going to start with you, and you're shaking your head over there, Mark. Doing business around the world, how should we test people? Because people talk a big game, right? And I think many of us, how many here over time have had that one person that they say they didn't deliver, they never did anything they said they were going to do? I'm naive. I'm the first to say to people, I'm naive and I'm an optimist. I like to believe. So what is your test?
I think that for me, I'm of two minds on the issue. I think that because of my experience in government, you develop insights in some of the real things that go on in the world and the reality of the fact that in many cases countries pursue their own interests, and when they do that, they may do things that to the public it may not seem so nice. But once you get past that reality, what you find is that you can pull those things back and identify those issues for which you have true and real alliances, where you have real places where you can join together with others to address issues, acknowledging the fact that, you know, you're going to watch and protect your interests strongly, but let's work on this other issue to find some better way to do that. And through that work, you can improve the relationship, you can improve your security, you can improve your understanding of what challenges and what opportunities are out there in the world that you can take advantage of and that you can help others be advantaged with to develop new relationships. So all of those things, I think, add up to be helpful in that respect.
And from you, Colin, I mean, you're meeting with some very dynamic personalities around the world. Your process of deciding how to spend your time. Because in business, there's lots of things around us, lots of noise, lots of distractions. How do you decide, and when do you decide to hyper-focus in on an area in your business?
I want to echo something that Mark was just saying. You know, how do you identify the potential problems? How do you identify who you can work with? There's a Russian phrase that was copied and duplicated here in the U.S. Doverяй, no проверяй. So trust but verify. So one of the things that you can do is you can meet with people and you can understand who they are and where they're from and what they're about. But echoing also Dr. Keith's point, it's not a question of whom you know, but who knows you, and can you use your relationships and your network to figure out if somebody that you want to do business with is somebody that you can actually trust. So that's a key thing. Now, how do you focus? How do you figure out what to focus your time on? This is for me and with my experience, this is a question of how much time do you have, and how little of it can you possibly spare to focus on to analyze a particular investment opportunity. For me, it's how big is the opportunity, what's the scalability of the opportunity, and figure out if you have your own metrics, figure out what kind of resources you have to put in place in order to determine, is this something that I can even bother spending time with? And if we look at how venture funds and private equity funds organize the world, the first question is, what size check do you write? If you're a $50 million check writer, you're not even going to look at a project that only requires $50 million to get to the next phase, because you don't want to participate and be the only investor. You want to have other people in your consortium. If it's a $1 million to $5 million investment, that's a friends and family round. We're not going to touch it. We're looking for stuff that's 50, and we're going to put 250 on the table.
So you know the ideal client or customer. You know what you want. And it goes back to Jeff's point earlier. You have to know the thing that you want. You simply will not get it. I remember when I started my show, the Life's Tough podcast, I had in my mind 3 people that I wanted. And as Jeff in his world of connecting dots, I knew that if I wanted to get to that person, it would probably take 20, 50, some unknown amount of connections. In your world, Dr. Williams, you were approving many of these astronauts to go to space. Not everybody is fit for it. I know there are times in business I have not always been a success. I have failed. When do we move on?
I think we are moving on right now. One of the exciting elements of the 1990s was the evolution of what we might call then space tourism, which has now turned into private spaceflight. And today we talk about professional astronauts. I am a professional astronaut. However, I'm a government professional astronaut, meaning my career as an astronaut was in the government sector. Today we see professional astronauts who are in the private sector. You look at all the SpaceX astronauts and what they're able to accomplish. So again, we're expanding the accessibility of space. One of the most amazing things that I was involved in my career in NASA was making the medical decision to approve Senator Glenn to fly in space at age 70. It's absolutely incredible. That set a new standard for all of us. And of course, now we've seen William Shatner go into space at age 90. So the capability to access space is changing rapidly. And I think that's really the goal in space medicine, is for us to be able to select individuals for government programs that have the appropriate background qualifications and medical certification, but also then expand the opportunity to others who might intermittently fly in space or only fly in space once. A scientist from a pharmaceutical company that wants to do genomic research on board the International Space Station, that's a great opportunity for us to expand our doors to be able to include all those individuals.
And because we're out of time, I love quotes. How many people here love quotes? We have that one thing, and I think of quotes that's interesting because they'll come out. You go, I remember this quote. Recently I heard, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It was like this profound light bulb went off in my head. And I said it to myself over and over and over again. So I have to get back on time because nothing changes. Mark, favorite quote?
What would be my favorite quote? Probably the reference from Lincoln about the better angels of our nature and about living up to the better sides of our personalities, because all of us, I believe, have capabilities to do wonderful things and terrible things. And I think Lincoln advised us to follow those places that take us to the better things in life. So I try to live by that.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Colin.
Yeah, in the context of global business, I'm gonna say one of the things that I try to advise my clients on and work on in the projects that I advise is do the fundamental work in order for you to generate success. So, and it goes back to one of my dad's quotes, which is, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. So.
Dr. Williams.
I think Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, really challenges us to think about this next millennium in which the human species will become a spacefaring species. We will be living on the moon. We will live on Mars. We may travel farther in our own solar system, and who knows what the limits will be.
Thank you, everybody. That ends the first panel discussion. Thank you very much, each and every one of you.